Hello.
Hello.
You ready for the next one?
Yeah. What's your presentation? You're fine with me.
It's the basic need. It says Great Falls on the end. Did you load that?
Third one. Third one. Third from the top.
This one?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Cool.
And that's PowerPoint, so just advance it with the space bar.
It's in Keynote now, so he has to do it this way.
Yeah, I'm not really sure how that works on Keynote. We could give it a try though.
We'll do it the best you
Hey,
can.
there we go. Cool.
So because of my utility background, I joined them because I wanted to be a voice for change from the inside. I thought I could have more influence that way. I led an environmental department. The last utility was in New York State, permitting multi-billion-dollar utility projects, going through this process at the state and federal level, and very disappointed in FERC's process. It never permitted any interstate pipelines. So let's move on. But this is just a picture of a 42-inch pipeline being installed in Nebraska. You get an idea of the immense disruption of the right-of-way. And this is Nebraska. They have some hills, but they don't have the mountains like we do in Virginia. Okay, next. So why should you care? I know why you care, but this is maybe for your friends and neighbors that don't have the engagement to the environmental issues that you have. Next. First, they're going to pay extra. All of the publicity about these things providing us with lower cost energy, lower cost gas is not the case. Next. This is a typical pipeline crossing of a river for a very small pipeline, much smaller than the ACP. So it will affect our land, water, and our economy. Next. And also our rights will be abridged. Go ahead, please. Especially, well, I'm going to talk about three main things. One is we have enough pipeline capacity, even in the high gas usage stage. Next. And using existing pipelines are far cheaper than building a new one. Next. And we can talk a little bit about our rights. Next. So first, we have enough pipeline capacity in Virginia and North Carolina, even in the high gas usage stage. Next. Now, when the application was filed for the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, between Virginia and North Carolina, they were expecting to add 11 more gas-fired power plants, in addition to the Brunswick plant, which went online last year, and Greensville, which is scheduled for 2018. Next. So even in that case, and Kirk talked a little bit about the Transco corridor. It's an 1,800-mile corridor with over 10,000 miles of pipe in it. There's at least 4 major pipelines in it, and historically it brought gas from the Gulf Coast production area in the south all the way up the East Coast to the Northeast metropolitan centers. Next. Go ahead, next. So it flowed in this direction. What's happening now is there's enough pipelines from the Marcellus production zone to fulfill much of the Northeast demand directly. So by going directly from Pennsylvania into those Northeast demand centers, about half of the capacity of this corridor is available to move gas to the south. Next. Dominion knows this. They were one of the first to pay for changes in New Jersey to allow gas to flow southward to provide supply to the Brunswick plant. Next. And it's also available to serve North Carolina. You can go, let's go to the next one. This is how this existing pipeline could be used to provide exactly the gas provided by the ACP in exactly the zones the ACP intends to provide. One is to go down this existing pipeline right-of-way, next, attached to the last 95 miles of the ACP, which is where all the North Carolina power plants are sited, and next, then go along an existing Columbia Gas right-of-way to feed Chesapeake, Virginia. All of that could be done at a fraction of the cost, mostly on existing right-of-ways, with about 4 times the capacity provided by the ACP available through the Transco corridor in our region. So even on the high gas usage pattern, we have enough. Next. Now, should we even consider the high gas usage situation? We don't think so. Really, the best way of doing this, the cheapest way of providing more generation is not to use it. Energy efficiency. Okay? Solar, wind, renewable sources. This is a plant that I helped get at least the concept for on Kauai years ago, which is a solar and battery storage operation. That will become cost effective in our region very soon. So if we're looking at the long-term demand, Kirk mentioned that electricity demand has been flat or declining 5 out of the last 8 years. We see the trend continuing through the 2030s. We don't need new power plants in order to have enough electricity. Next. So if we don't need new power plants, next, we don't need new pipelines to serve them. Next. So how about the existing pipelines being cheaper? Next. Why? Next. The main thing is existing pipelines have been mostly paid for by previous customers. Okay. Next. The new pipeline, well, the ACP, for example, is 3 to 8 times more expensive to move gas along the ACP than any of the existing Columbia Gas, Transco, Dominion Transmission, etc. in Virginia. For example, to serve these 2 power plants with the existing pipeline, next, would cost this amount of money. Next, if the same amount of gas was provided through the ACP, the transportation cost alone, not the cost of the gas. Oh, I'm sorry. This is the ACP coming down, showing to connect to these same 2 pipelines, primarily so they can easily get into North Carolina. Next, the cost difference is over $200 million to Virginia ratepayers, just to Virginia ratepayers. Now, if you attach all the other power plants down in North Carolina and all the other new power plants Dominion is intending to build in Virginia, that cost gets higher and higher. Next. Next, please. All right, so what does this lead to? Next. If we have enough supply, next, and it's cheaper, next, where's the public purpose? Okay? That's the foundation of eminent domain, right? We don't want a few people to stand in the way of the benefit to many. But if there's no benefit to many, where's the justification for the seizure of the property? Next. So we're really talking about private gain here for these pipeline projects. Next. The Virginia Constitution in 2013 was amended to say no private gain. You can't use eminent domain for private gain. Now, even if this just was a Virginia issue, Dominion got the General Assembly to give them a waiver of that anyway. But it's not a Virginia issue. Next. It's a federal issue. So once the Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity is issued, the pipeline owners are granted the right, the federal right to use eminent domain, and they can take landowners to federal court and get access to that land.
Has that been done?
No, because they don't have their certificate yet. Well, you know, they never began the NEPA process.
Exactly.
This, I've been through this. I've been through this on the utility side, and it's supposed to be rigorous. The fundamental part of NEPA is there a need for the project? All FERC does is look to see if there are signed contracts for the capacity. And in pipeline after pipeline, those contracts are signed by subsidiaries of the owners of the pipeline. That's the case for the ACP, it's the case for the MVP, it's the case for many others around the country. Now, FERC's own guidelines say that is not sufficient proof of market demand, but yet that's the only thing they look at. So the difficulty is, since our state regulators are out of the picture pretty much, like the SCC, which is trying to balance the ratepayers' interest against the, the interest of the developers, if FERC doesn't look at it, who is? I gave testimony to the SCC last fall and said, you need to pay attention to this. The ratepayers are going to pay $4 billion over 20 years whether or not any gas moves along the ACP or not, if it's certified and built. That's what Dominion wants to do. Dominion, the utility will not gain any value from that. They just want to pass through their cost. But the ratepayers will pay that $4 billion, which will go to the owners of the pipeline. So the parent companies, Dominion Energy, Duke Energy, Southern Company, they're the ones that make the money. And help me on time here, I don't want to go too far, but what's happened is this 14% is return on equity. Actually, the ACP has a 15% overall return on investment. It is 50% higher than other kinds of utility projects, like building a transmission line, building a power plant, their overall rate of return. FERC also regulates interstate transmission lines. They have been very thorough in justifying what the rate of return is for that, and it's about 10%. Yet they grant 15% for pipelines. So about a dozen different utility holding companies, we have 3 of them involved in the ACP, have gotten into the business of building natural gas pipelines because their revenues from their subsidiaries, their regulated subsidiaries, have stabilized as electricity demand has stabilized. So in order to keep their stock prices up, their shareholders happy, the people who pay the executives, right, they have to find other ways of earning more money. Pipeline is a wonderful way of doing it because your investors see that you can invest over $5 billion in the ACP, for example, and have a guaranteed 20-year return paid for by the ratepayers in your captive utilities. Not just Dominion, but Duke. Duke owns both Piedmont Natural Gas and 2 utilities, Duke in North Carolina and Duke in South Carolina, that will use this gas. So it's a great idea from a financial point of view if you're a utility executive or a holding company executive, but it does the ratepayers no good. We all are paying extra for this, for something we don't need.
So does this come to, do these pipelines get to a point where they're then enabling the export of the gas as well?
Well, let me be fair to Dominion. They say they have no plans to export gas through this pipeline. But all new large natural gas transmission pipelines are interconnected. So it is quite possible that gas could flow from there either up to Cove Point or down to, there's been discussion of a LNG facility in Georgia. Dominion owns gas transmission lines in South Carolina. ACP just stops right across the border in North Carolina. It could connect to that. That could be extended down to the Atlantic coast of Georgia for an LNG facility. What LNG will do is we are exporting our cheap gas overseas. Okay? The more we use our cheap gas, all the new wells being drilled now are less productive than the wells we have already drilled. Gas is going to keep getting more expensive. So not only will you pay extra for this pipeline contract, you will also pay extra for the higher cost of fuel. Just using Dominion's forecast for how they see natural gas prices increasing, this Brunswick plant that went online last year, in about 10 to 15 years with their projections for the increase in fuel prices, the price of electricity generated by that plant in 10 or 15 years will be twice what it is today. So all of this talk about this will give us lower energy, this will give us more jobs. The developers admitted the typical job on the pipeline will last just 8 to 10 months. The largest single job sector in the United States right now is in the building trades doing energy efficiency work, over 2 million, about 2 million workers. That may double the fastest single growing job category in the US is solar installer. So if you really want economic enhancement, if you want more job production, what we talked about in energy efficiency and renewables is the way to go. So if the policymakers, the industry people are really interested in that, they should choose another path, and we should help them do that. One of the problems here is utilities get paid to build more. The only way they can increase their revenues is to build more, because this cost of service system will pay you for what you built, which is why we get more pipelines, which is why we get more power plants. Energy efficiency cuts their revenues. These are not stupid people. They are very intelligent, powerful people running these holding companies. They know what's best for the interest as the rules tell them their interests are right now. So if you really want to make some long-term change, which is what I'm trying to do, is to get us a 21st century energy system, we have to give the utilities a path to prosper doing what's good for us. Okay?
How do we do? What is it?
Well, we encourage our politicians to change the rules. It's happened in New York. It's happened in Massachusetts. It's happening in California. It's happening in other states that say, if we really want clean, cheaper energy with more job creation and a more vibrant economy, we need to do something different than what we've done through the 20th century.
Can you go over again what would allow Transco to reverse the flow to the south? Or is it because
There's 4 pipelines that go along that corridor.
Hmm.
Okay, if you look in Buckingham where the compressor station will be, there's 4 major pipelines. So if you take the supply from the Marcellus and send it directly to the northeastern markets, you don't need as much to flow from the south to the north. So since you've supplied those already, you now have opened up, let's say, 2 of those pipelines to take gas from the north to the south.
How is it going to get to those northeast markets that that
So
Marcellus
do we do
gas?
these more technical questions offline? 'Cause
Yeah.
we've got to keep moving. I'm
Yes.
sorry.
Sort of playing the devil's advocate, does anybody argue whether or not the new pipelines would be safer than the older pipelines?
No, they have a real difficulty doing that because the actual incident reports show that leaks and explosions in pipelines that are less than 10 years old are about equal to pipelines that are more than 50 and 60 years old, and all the ones in between are better.
That's
Partly because they're rushing these things. The Rover pipeline was the last pipeline approved in February before Commissioner Bay left. There were 8 major incidents on that. 2 million gallons of drilling mud ended up in a wetland in the flat Ohio countryside. No one has built a 42-inch pipeline in mountains as high or hills as steep as what will be encountered in Virginia.
Let's save other questions for the breakout sessions or for one-on-one with, we're a little bit behind on time.
Virginia tried to deregulate its electrical systems in 2007 and very quickly re-regulated them. Dominion wrote the rules. So they wrote the comp plan. I'm a former computer salesperson. They wrote the comp plan that they wanted, and they work it. So that's what we're up against, and that's what we need to work on. So we need to keep moving along. It'll give us a little bit of time for questions if we get our free space in the middle. The next speaker is Ernie Reed, president of Wild Virginia, and he'll present pipelines activism in the National Forest. Wild Virginia is an organization with the goals of protecting Virginia's wild places and fighting to keep the proposed Atlantic Coast Pipeline and the Mountain Valley Pipelines from bisecting the George Washington, Jefferson, and Monongahela National Forests. Ernie is also president of Friends of Nelson, a citizens group founded in 2014 that's focused on preventing the construction of the ACP. He has experience fighting and intervening in pipeline projects in Ohio, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Virginia. Ernie, come on down.